Truckers work risky jobs. As you can see, they gamble with their own lives to make a living and provide the modern world with goods we take for granted. You're watching Darkness Prevails, the best channel to share your creepy stories with the world, because this world is a strange one. Truckers do the world a valuable and honorable service, but trucking can be extremely stressful. The following allegedly true stories from truckers or about truckers show us the horrors of working and often living on the road. If you want to be in a future video like this one, I'm looking for some really creepy stories from KFC. If you've got one, send it to me at darknessprevails.org/submit. Also, stay until the end of the video for my favorite early comments from the previous episode. Now, let's get on the road and keep that dash cam ready. Number 1. The stuff you see and encounter is a mobile heavy diesel tech. Submitted by DuoDoUrden. As a diesel tech for nearly 11 years officially, and while working with my grandfather and father since I could hold a tool, I've seen quite a few things. As for me, I'm rather average in height, about 5'9", but I'm stocky and built like a logger. I don't chase monsters or mysteries. Most of the time, the mysteries I have are, how the heck did you do that, while trying to fix old, tired, heavy equipment? But as I started working out of my own toolbox and truck, sure, there were some odd people I had to perform miracles to get things to work again, but there were a couple of creepy encounters. One time, I got a call at about 1 in the morning in the winter. A trucker was broke down on a highway about an hour away. Being self-employed, I would take whatever calls and income I could get. I've even taken a few jobs from animal rendering plants, and I had to wear 2 layers of coveralls and rubber gloves, yet that terrible smell still permeated into my hands and clothes, and it took weeks to get it out. Anyway, I drop out there. The call was placed somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. Those highways can be pretty quiet that late at night, and it's usually always an inky black night with rain or snow, or a mix of both. It was not hard to find the truck on the side of the road, as it was basically the only thing out there at the time. I pulled in ahead of the truck and backed up so I could get my tools and light equipment close to it. I met the guy, and wow did he smell. Like he had not been in a shower for months, and it was hard to be close to the guy. I asked him my questions, what was going on. Turns out some of the air controls in the cab had broken and were causing a lot of alarms to go off. Being a truck from the early 80s with a sleeper cab, so it has a bed as a part of the cab for long-haul drives, it's definitely bound to happen. So he allows me up in the cab to do my work. I begin taking apart the dashboard to replace the hose fittings and such. Well, remember how I mentioned he smelled badly? Well, the cab was much, much worse. I was gagging and taking gasps, trying not to blow chunks. I tried to finish up quickly. Eventually, I was laying back on the floor of the cab cleaning up my work and such, when I felt something start to rub and roll across my chest, like someone was running a hose across me. I sit up, and it's a freaking python. Never once did he mention there was a python in the cab. I'm not necessarily afraid of snakes, but when something like that is trying to coil around you to get warm, it would freak anyone out. I said my curses and rushed to work faster. The old trucker was laughing at me and watching everything unwind. Then, after he had his giggles, he grabbed the python and put it back in its cage in the back. I finished up and got out, and he said, "You think that was scary? Well, I got body parts in the back." Well, at that point, my heart stopped. I'm on a dark, quiet highway alone with some smelly trucker in the middle of nowhere, and he says something like that. He may have been joking, sure, but I still didn't know why he smelled the way he did. I go back to my truck and take a moment to breathe. I run up the bill on my tablet and go back to the guy. He pulls out his log sheet and his wallet. "Sorry about Bill. He got out and likes to hide in the dash when it's cold." Oh, and don't worry about the body parts. I'm hauling those up to the medical college." I just sighed and got my payment from him, then left. So the guy and his python were body haulers. That's nice. I ask now when a trucker calls me if they have any pets in the cab so I can be ready for it. And later on I found out that guy likes to screw with people, and that's why the local shop gave him my number. Lucky me. My other event was a few years ago. I got a call from a local logging company needing someone to fix some really old equipment that many people don't know how to fix anymore, and they wanted me to fix some of the vandalized equipment they had. It's something of a specialty of mine, fixing old things that people no longer know how to fix. I got the GPS location, and it was deep into the Cascades. I took the long drive up there. At that time, I was carrying a .45 for protection on jobs, as well as an AR. I've had a few close calls with cougars and black bears, so being that far out in the woods, I wanted to be prepared, especially if I had to camp in the mountains. I also had an Arctic sleeping bag, a lot of water, and a couple of MREs just in case. I got to work and tore into the old logging equipment and trucks, stuff repurposed from military surplus it looked like. After a couple of hours, I finished up with my work on the vehicles. It was really late, and the crew was all left for the day, except for the owner, who stayed a bit longer to help me with doing final adjustments. I was packing up and I did my paperwork, and finally the owner had left. We were so far out there that cell phone coverage was really spotty, if there was any at all. I got ready to go as the sun was setting, and well, my truck's battery had given up the ghost. Well, it was too late now to try to get it started, so I prepared for a night of camping in my truck on a logging site. Not that I didn't mind camping or roughing it every once in a while. It's still annoying to be stranded that far from home and civilization. I'm sure you could understand. I got a small fire going with all the scraps of trees and such. There was plenty down here. I sat down on a log next to me and got my MRE cooking in its bag. I could hear deer moving about, small rodents making nests in the down foliage. Owls were hooting and screeching in the night. The crickets and other bugs were singing their songs. It would have been beautiful out there if it hadn't turned so creepy. Because what happened next was all those sounds I just listed completely stopped. All at once, as if someone just pressed the mute button. It was completely silent. The only thing ringing in my ears was the sound of the fire popping and cracking. Keeping my eyes peeled, I slowly finished my food and moved a cut piece of wood so my back was to my truck and chambered my weapons. I grew up hunting. I learned from my elders that when the forest goes quiet, there's some sort of predator in the area. Several hours went by in that night with this insane silence hovering over me. Every so often I'd interrupt it, placing more kindling in the fire to keep it alive. Then, suddenly, off a ways down the mountain from the road, I hear a whistle that sounds like an owl's screech, but it didn't sound right. Then there was another one further up the mountain. At this point, I threw on more wood to try to get the fire to light up more in my area, keeping any wild animals at bay. Plus, I wanted to give myself a buffer zone to see any eye reflections with the fire's light. I gripped my AR tight, and I stood up. Suddenly, masses of rocks began to fly down the mountain, hitting the equipment, and at my feet. Many of the rocks were softball size. It even broke some of the glass I had replaced that day. At that point, I let off a few rounds as a warning. Everything stops, and it goes quiet again. No more stones flying down at me. But maybe half an hour later, in the stone-cold darkness, I hear bang, 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 as if someone was taking a wooden bat against a tree. That same noise was also coming from elsewhere above me in the woods, like it was just over the crest of the hill. Then I heard thumping like large, heavy footsteps, and then it would all stop, and the maddening silence would return. I stood there waiting, as if something was about to break from the edge of the fire and start charging at me. Then I noticed 2 reddish-yellow dots in the hill staring down at me. Something was looking in my direction. I could see them watching me, blinking. I wanted to shoulder my weapon and let loose with the trigger, and then something in me said it's not the one you see you should be worried about. It's the ones you can't see. So I just remained calm and stood there, watching those eyes in the dark, watching me. It felt like I was living a nightmare. I felt so helpless next to a fire armed with a rifle, and feeling like any moment, no matter how many rounds I have, there was nothing I could do to get away. I simply kicked on another piece of a log and continued my staring contest with whatever that thing was. Eventually, the eyes began to move and disappeared behind something and never returned that night. I spent the rest of the night keeping the fire going, watching and listening, and soon, to my great relief, the sounds of the forest returned. When they did, I felt safe enough to crawl into my cab of my service truck and finally get some sleep. Next thing I knew, I was awakened by the owner of the company knocking on my window. I nearly jumped out of the passenger door. He asked me why I was still up here, and I told him that my battery went out and I could not get a cell signal. He then asked me about the few rifle casings I left out there and the broken window. I gave him the full story. He gave me a cup of coffee as he stirred up my fire and got it going. He dragged over another log and sat down on it, and then he gave me his story of another mechanic that had stayed there with them. The mechanic the next day quit and loaded up his camper and never returned to the woods for work. It was the same thing, rocks flying, noises in the forests going quiet. They helped me jump my truck, and I later got going. It was that night that I stayed there that has me staying out of the woods overnight at all costs. I do not do work deep in the woods anymore. Now they either have to bring it to me, or it has to be close to home. Things go down in the woods at night. Certain creatures don't want you around. Number 2. The Gas Station Trucker. Submitted by SadMonroe. In early 2014, my family opened a gas station in New Mexico. It was a rinky-dink little convenience store, and it was right in front of the local grocery store, and to the right of it was my mother's salon. I was 14 at the time. I'm 17 now. For being a girl who developed early, I was used to grown men mistaking me for someone of age and flirting with me. But what I experienced working at that gas station was something that keeps me on the edge around truckers and truck stops. During my sophomore year, I was a rebellious child. I'd never show up to school, and if I did go, I would just skip class. To avoid being scolded by my parents, I would offer to cover for my dad at work while he worked on keeping books. It started out as a rare deal, but I ended up never going back to school and becoming the manager. I'd show up to work at 5:45 to give me time to turn on fridges and computers. Once that was done, at 6, I would open the store. I worked there for about 6 months before I started noticing the type of people who come in. There were the regulars who'd get the exact same thing every day, ranging from Gatorade to gas station tornadoes and coffee. Across the way was a truck stop that was always busy and occasionally sending customers to us. I met weird truckers, but there was this one guy that really rubbed me the wrong way. This man was Hispanic. I think he lived in town or in a nearby area, because after seeing him the first time, I began seeing him a lot more. He would always make weird comments about my appearance. "Hey, I really like your leggings," was his most famous. Every time I heard him say it, I would cover the rest of my body in one of those uncomfortable arms crossed positions, but he would just smile bigger, laugh, then walk away. One morning, my parents were out of town, and and I couldn't sleep, so I decided to head to work early to start the morning cleaning process. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a semi parked behind my mom's salon. Note that the alley behind the salon wasn't large enough for vehicles to go through, let alone a semi, and it was a dead end. I didn't think much of it, so I continued to open the store and make coffee and start the day. About 20 minutes later, I heard a tapping on the glass door. I'm not easily scared, but I have severe anxiety, which gives me abort mission signals constantly. So when I get them, I have no choice but to brush them off and keep working. I turned my head, and I saw the trucker that had been giving me a weird feeling. Now, I don't open the door unless my coworker, who is a close friend to me, shows up, but I decided to open the door anyway. He asked as usual, "Hi, how are you today?" and other common greetings. Then he continued around the store, gathering things. He finally brought them up to the counter, and I began to scan the snacks and energy drinks. I was almost finished when he started to lean over the counter. The counter was about waist high, and I'm 5'3", so he towered over it. He kept leaning, and I looked at him with a disgusted face, which drew him back. Then he complimented my thighs and my leggings. This time he didn't laugh then leave like he usually did. He kept talking, but the thing that sent alarms and red flags through the sky is when he said, "You're very beautiful, you know. You should come work with me." I forced out a fake laugh, but I was obviously very uncomfortable. He would moan to himself, and as he was gathering his things, my coworker walked in. I asked her to watch the counter as I used the restroom. Apparently, as I went to the bathroom, he kept asking her about me, asking my work schedule, what time I got off on what days, but as a grown woman herself, she saw the red flags flying as well. She told him off and threatened to call the cops if he came around me, yelling about how I'm just a minor and how he was vile. I never had to come face to face with him again, but I would still often notice his truck parked outside the building, knowing he was still watching me. It was then that I began to feel scared to go to work. I even brought up to my parents that men were making advances on me, and it made me feel unsafe. I was told to take it as a compliment. But the stories of truckers taking women started to circulate through our gas station employees, who recommended me to stop working alone, as my friend who had saved me that time had children and was rarely ever there anymore. Eventually, a man was found in his semi across the street, no longer alive. He had OD'd. I never knew who it was, but I did always find it curious that around the time that happened, I stopped seeing that man and his truck. I no longer work there, and I'll probably never work at another gas station again, because I always felt that that guy was more places than I noticed. I don't dislike truckers, I just don't like creeps that use the job to their advantage, and unfortunately, my parents didn't care enough about my well-being and safety. I'm just glad that my coworker stepped in to protect me, because who knows what he would have done if she wasn't there. Maybe he would have waited for me to clock out. What if one day he didn't just watch me from his truck? I'm glad I didn't have to find out. To all the girls out there, be safe, travel in groups, and you don't have to be friendly to someone who makes you severely uncomfortable. Number 3. The Boy Walking in the Ditch. Submitted by Gina D. I've been a long-haul trucker for 5 years now, and while I've met plenty of drivers with their own creepy stories, I hadn't really gone through anything crazy before now. I was hauling popcorn in Georgia, and sometimes we load in pretty desolate places. This particular farm was about an hour's drive from Atlanta. It was far, really far from civilization. and I was beginning to think my GPS was leading me in circles. Everything looked the same, and it was getting dark when I saw something I definitely have never seen before. There was a little boy that couldn't have been more than 5 years old, crying and waving me down from the ditch, mouthing the words, "Please stop." I slowed down quite a ways away from the kid. I felt bad for him, but at the same time something felt completely wrong. There was nothing but woods around here. No houses, no cars that I could see, just a kid standing in the middle of nowhere. I immediately called the cops to report it, and they made sure to get my exact location and told me to stay in the truck and watch the child. Yet, I was still torn between listening to my gut and helping the defenseless child. I'm glad I listened and stayed in the truck though, as cowardly as that sounds. He was looking around frantically, still crying but not coming towards my vehicle. The police responded surprisingly fast, as to be expected when there's a child involved, and as the sirens came into earshot, 2 all-black Escalades came out of the woods and booked it away from there. The police that arrived grabbed the kid and began to pursue the Escalades. The one with the kid came to my truck first and talked to me. He explained it to me, that what I just witnessed was a gang initiation and that the little boy was bait, and I had nearly taken it. I gave my statement, but I didn't get any more answers beyond that. The kid himself was terrified but unhurt. He and I were both lucky to leave the desolate, unforgiving back road alive that night. Number 4. One Headlight. Submitted by Snax. I often travel between cities in Southern California. My best friend lives 70 miles away from my hometown, but thanks to freeways, it's usually only an hour drive. Since traffic is insane in the LA area, I fell into the habit of only making the commute in the middle of the night. At 3 a.m., the only people on the road are usually truckers, and sparsely a few cars. I don't have to concentrate too hard, and I can catch up on my podcasts. My parents were always uncomfortable with me driving such a distance alone in the wee hours of the morning, but I always shrugged it off as the usual parental paranoia, until one night. I had told my parents I was going to be home by midnight that night. I had work in the morning, so my fun-filled weekend with my best friend had to come to an end. But I pushed it. 11, 12, 1 in the morning. All passed me by as we shoveled chips into our faces and watched funny YouTube videos together. When it was about 2:15 in the morning, I finally decided it was time to head out. My parents were probably asleep anyway, and didn't even know I was coming home so late. My friend was getting really tired as well, and instead of walking me out to my car like she usually did, she fell asleep. I stepped out the door and onto the porch. My friend lives in a nice and relatively safe suburb, and I'd walked around it at this hour of night plenty of times, so I wasn't frightened at the least. I threw my bag into the back of my little sedan parked on the street, and I climbed into the driver's seat. After buckling up, turning on the engine, and picking a fitting podcast for my journey home, I looked up from my phone to find I was suddenly blocked in. Next to my car, a truck had pulled in close, trapping me in my parking spot. It was a big white work truck. It wasn't beat up per se, but it showed its age. It looked to be from the late 90s. The thing that caught my eye about the vehicle was the fact that its right headlight was burned out. Before I could take in more of the vehicle, the passenger window rolled down, and I could see the driver lean out from the darkness of the cab and look down at me, into the orange streetlight. He looked to be in his 40s. He was short, fat, and very greasy. He was balding, but what was left on his head was messy locks of oily black hair. He gave me a yellowed smile and motioned for me to roll my window down. Like an idiot, I did. "Do you know how to get to Victory Boulevard from here?" he asked in a voice accented with phlegm. I thought it was kind of a silly question, as Victory is one of the easiest streets to find in the area, but I was nice and pointed the way down the road. "Yeah, it's just about 3 blocks down that way. You can't miss it." He seemed satisfied with that answer, but before rolling up his window and driving off, he said something that unsettled me. "Stay safe, you hear? It's dangerous late at night for pretty girls like yourself." With that, he drove off, and I figured he was gone for good. I took that moment to lock my doors and text my friend about the guy before leaving. I finally got on the road, but before it was even out of the neighborhood, I looked into my rearview mirror to see that a truck was following me out. My blood went icy. It was the same big truck from before, with the one headlight. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my mind down. Maybe he didn't follow my directions and got turned around. Maybe he was just following me out of the neighborhood in the hope that I would lead him to the street he was looking for. I glanced in the mirror again. I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew they were on me. Luckily, I had to pass over Victory to get to the freeway home. With a bit of luck, I would get him to the street he needed. Then he would turn off into the night. Tensely, I pulled up to Victory Boulevard. Even at 2:30 in the morning, it was a red light. The truck was still behind me. When I got the green to go, I laid on the gas and continued down the road past the intersection. But to my terror, there was that one headlight still, riding my bumper now, leaving the road he had supposedly been looking for behind him. My stomach was down to my feet at this point, but my only option now was to get on the freeway and try to lose him in the next 70 miles. I pulled up on the ramp, and he was still right behind me. I floored it once I hit the freeway proper, hoping there would be enough traffic for me to shake him off. Unfortunately, it was my ideal condition on the road. There were only a couple Big Mac trucks making late-night long hauls, and less than a handful of other private vehicles. So, there was nowhere to hide. I spent the next 30 minutes weaving in and out of what little traffic there was, but it was no use. Every time I looked back, there was that one headlight staring right back at me. On a sign of upcoming off-ramps, I saw a name I recognized. It was the same off-ramp that another friend of mine's ex-boyfriend had lived off of. I'd taken her back and forth a bunch of times, so I knew one thing was sure. There would be lots of twisty and confusing suburban streets there, and I started to form a plan. At the last minute possible, I veered off the freeway and onto the off-ramp. The truck screeched after me. I ran a traffic light, and that gave me enough time to quickly turn a corner into a neighborhood. I spent 5 minutes whipping around the sleepy house-lined streets and getting myself as lost as possible. Then I parked on the side of the road, caught my breath for a moment. A few minutes passed, and there was no signs of him. The feeling of relief was like no other. I started the car again and pulled out of the neighborhood, back toward the freeway to finish my journey home. As I was sitting at the light, waiting to turn onto the ramp, when I looked across the road, my whole body froze. On the other side of the intersection was a white truck with one headlight. How did he know I was trying to trick him? Then I remembered the license plate frame on the back of my car, with the name of my hometown in huge white letters. He knew exactly where I was going. The light changed, and I pulled back onto the freeway, one headlight shining in my rear view mirror. I had to formulate a new plan if I was going to get away from him. I figured I could take my usual exit to get home, but instead drive to the local police station, where I'd be safe. No one in their right mind would try anything at a police station. If he was still following me, I could get the cops on my side no problem. I gripped the steering wheel, resolved in my plan, and drove. The traffic had grown a little thicker than before, so I continued my weaving in and out of lanes, which I'm sure the other drivers loved. I glanced back at my mirror and noticed the truck was a distance back now, behind some other cars. As minutes went on, he was further and further away until I couldn't see him at all. By the time I got to my home exit, he was nowhere in sight. I pulled down a side street after getting off the freeway, and I parked just to see nothing. My only guess was that the old truck didn't have the gas to make it the full way. Whatever happened, I'm relieved it did. Anyone that determined to stalk a girl at night in her car for almost 70 miles is not someone I want to encounter without a car around me. I drove home, and the first thing I did was fling myself into my mother's arms. She had been awake and worried sick. She was going to give me an earful for being so late, but when she saw I was crying, she just hugged me and let me tell her what happened to me. After hearing my story, she figured the terror I experienced was enough punishment. Be wary of the night. I still make my 3 a.m. drives, but now there's an edge of caution in my stomach at all times. Sometimes, I swear, in the middle of the night on the freeway, just a few cars behind me, I see that one headlight. And number 5, a trucker's weird story, submitted by Anon. My father was 37 years old. I was only 3 at the time. My parents divorced when I was 1. Back then, my dad was working as a truck driver in Iowa, and this is a story he later told me about one of the most bizarre things he'd ever witnessed. He got a call from his truck company to pick up a shipping container at a farm. He drove out to the farm to pick it up. When he arrived, he saw 3 unmarked cars that appeared to be for federal agents. He hooked up the container and the cars followed him. He was required to drop the container at a military base in Nevada. He can only stop for fuel and bathroom breaks. They even gave him clearance to skip any and all way stations, which was beyond weird for a trucker. A couple of times local police cars tried to pull him over, but the Secret Service cars stopped the police, and then they'd be back on their way in no time. Once he arrived at the base, he noticed there were twice as many federal vehicles compared to when he started the journey. They then had him get out of the truck, after which a different driver got in the truck, drove it into a dirt hole, and buried the truck in its entirety. The cab and everything, which luckily he didn't own the cab. He doesn't know what was inside the truck, and I don't think he ever wanted to know. I'm 15, and this story scares the crap out of me, thinking about what was so important in that container that the entire truck had to be buried, confidentially, after being escorted by dozens of Secret Service agents. You may not like it, but some very weird things are going on. If you drive for a living and you come across some questionable scenes and encounters, if you fear for your life on the job, or if you see something that scars you for life, all I can say is keep trucking and maybe pack yourself a boomstick in the back of the cab just in case. As I always say, this world is strange. If you let your guard down for too long, this place will eat you alive without warning. Kudos to all the truckers out there listening. Thank you for the hours you put in, and do your best to be safe. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget, you can send me your scary KFC story soon at darknessprevails.org/submit. If you want to support this channel in an extra way, think about grabbing my merchandise at morbidmonsters.com. We've got Darkness Prevail themed t-shirts, stickers, decals, and more. Or think about donating just $1 a month at patreon.com/darknessprevails. Every little bit helps. As promised, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode about 10 horrific happenings at Disneyland and Disney World. Cooper Clark says, "The Mickey Mouse Clubhouse of Doom." What makes that so funny is the fact that people would still pay hundreds of dollars to go there. Come on children, let's go get maimed. Isic Ninja says, "Hi, I am always Cool, it's good to know that a galactic god of some sort is watching my channel. So Lost says, "What's up, old Darkio? How about some cult stories? Those are always entertaining." Well, you know what they say. You haven't really partied until you get sacrificed to Satan. I've done it twice. I highly recommend it. Krebs says, "That Mickey Mouse kept staring at me. That's the point. The Mickey Mouse image in that thumbnail is haunted." And Warrior Nun says, "I'm going to Disneyland with my husband this year. Why am I watching this?" Good luck. You're gonna need it. Anyway, thank you all so much for stopping by and listening. From now on, I'll be giving a special thanks to my patrons with these credits, because these are the amazing folks who go above and beyond. In fact, everyone watching and listening is awesome. So, thank you. Stay safe out there, and stay creepy.